So we've got a token here. We're going to end up calling this. We're going to expect to get back the user. Of course, this is not going to work at the moment. What we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of middleware in here. And so on our app, we're going to go over here. We're going to get rid of some of the stuff that's here that we're not going to use anymore. We're not going to use express session here. And what we'll end up doing here is we'll say app.use. And what we'll do is we'll say request response next. And we only care if, in fact, we have a header for authentication. So we'll just ask the question. We'll say, if not, request.headers.authorization. And if we don't have this, we're done. There's nothing else to do. Otherwise, and let's just get out of here because we're done. Otherwise, what we actually want to do here is we actually want to use this value. And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to put on the request object. You could go over here, and we could say user findByToken request headers authorization. That's going to be our token that we're going to send up. And we're going to do it then over here, and we'll get the user. And in this case, if we actually have the user, we'll say request.user equals the user that we found. We don't have a session here. And we'll call next. And we'll do a catch over here. If there's an error, we'll call next with the error. And let's just change this a little bit. So here, we're not going to use session. We're just going to put a user on here. And we're not going to end up passing over here. We've got a couple of things that are probably going wrong. Let's actually just comment out a few things over here. So let's just focus on this test for the moment. So we end up getting a 500 back here, and that's because we don't have this method findByToken. Let's set this up. So here, we're going to end up passing in a function, which is going to be a token. And let's just sort of think happy path for a moment here. We'll go over here and we'll say ID. We're going to take the token, and we're going to end up decoding the token. How are we going to end up decoding it? Excuse me, I have this reversed. We're going to say ID, and this is going to be JWT decode token. We'll use process environment secret. We're going to have to bring in JWT here. JWT simple. And again, there's other libraries that'll end up doing the same thing. But this is going to end up being our token. So we'll be optimistic here and assume that we can end up destructuring this and getting an ID. And then we simply can go over here and we can end up doing a return. And we could go over here and we could say this find by primary key, whatever the ID is. So we're going to pass this token up. And we'll see that we end up passing. Okay? Let's actually just do one more test over here. And we'll go over here and let's also see, did we actually get Larry? Expect response.body.name to equal Larry. Let's take a look and see. Take a look at that. So we've got our app. And here, we've got our request.user that's being sent here. Let's actually just see what's getting sent back. So we've got our response. Oh, not name, sorry. Response.body username. So that ends up passing. We could just, again, go from red to green. Actually, we did already, but if we wanted to do it this way, we could actually see the value. So here, this works, but this is only part of it. We also want to test out what happens if you don't have a valid token. So if we go over here, we're going to specify, well, a couple of different cases here. We'll say with invalid token. So if you don't have a valid token, we expect, hey, look, this is going to be an error. We expect we're going to end up getting back a 401. So we'll come back over here. We're not going to really have any data here. We're just going to have a 401. And we don't end up getting that back, but that's because we have a valid token here. So let's put in an invalid token. Well, what could be an invalid token? Let's just add an exclamation point to our secret. Okay? So here we end up getting a 500 back. And if we see the error is going to be, hey, look, you have a signature verification that failed. So here we just need to do a little bit of work to send back the right response here. And what I'm going to end up doing here is that we could go over here. Here we could put in a try. And we could put in a catch over here. And we could go over here and say, hey, look, if you end up getting this exception here, what we can end up doing is that we can end up throwing an error that's going to come back here. We'll make this a status of 401. And if we're going to do this, let's go over here and we'll say let ID. And here we could say ID equals ID. Let's just make this. See, we have something happening that's, this is synchronous, the decoding. Let's make this a little bit easier to do. Let's make this async. If we end up running into this error, we'll end up throwing the error here. We can actually do an await here for the user. And here we could end up returning the user. So we could make this asynchronous. We'll end up throwing this error. If in fact we run into an error over here, and this will end up passing. So that'll work if we end up having a bad token. But let's do a couple of other quick scenarios here. So this ends up working with an invalid token. How about with a user that doesn't exist? So we'll say this should also end up returning a 401. So how can we do this? Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll go over here and we'll say, hey, look, can make this async, and we could await, and we'll say user destroy where ID is equal to seed.Larry ID. So we're going to expect to get a 401 if this happens, and we'll run into a couple of problems here because user is not defined. So let's bring in user. And here we end up getting a 401 as well, but we're really not testing this correctly. Right? This is going to be a valid token, but with a user that doesn't exist. And so we pass this in, and we end up getting back a 401 as well. right? And that's happening because, again, we have no user that's being set here. And so here we've actually got, a good chunk of this done, but we still haven't determined how we're going to end up sending this token down to the user. So granted, we've got our application set up. If the authorization header is there, we're going to end up setting a user on the request object, but we still have to deal with how we end up authenticating the user as well. So we'll look at that next.